A socialist tells us he's not a socialist, and calling them a socialist is just a GOP smear tactic. New medical research may give opioid addicts life-saving on-demand medication, and it makes me go, There's even more to the Chick-fil-A story that we talked about last week and their hypocrisy. And people apparently can't critically think about Uber in its latest sexual assault report. Boy, do we have a fun episode of Critical Thinking right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Yes, I am your host with the most numbers, Andrew Coppins. Follow me on social media, whether that's Facebook, whether that's Instagram, whether that is Twitter, Parlay, freedomhard.com, you name it. It is at The Coppins Show. And for those of you who are tuning in, watching, or listening for the very first time, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And my last name, Coppins, can be spelled Coppens, Coppens. No, it's not Coupons, Copen, Keepins, Copons, none of it. It is Coppins. Hooked on phonics, worked for me. Hopefully it can work for you. Yeah, that's a note to you telemarketers out there. If you want my attention, actually say my name correctly. But anyway, we have a lot to talk about on this show, and first and foremost, I've got to give a shout out because in just a few hours, my Wisconsin Badgers, Bucky Badger, and the whole crew of the Badger Faithful are going to be in Indy for the Big Ten championship game. The Badgers, after a few years not in the mix, are finally back where they belong, controlling the Big Ten West Division, and their reward, taking on the undefeated number 1 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. Oh, this could be a disaster, or it could be glorious. I don't think it's going to be anywhere in between. But for those of you who are non-sports fans, because most of you are tuning in for me critically thinking through the news of the week, let's dive right into that. And part 1 here on the show, welcome back to our Socialism Sucks series. Yes, it's been a while since Socialism Sucks has been something that we've really formally talked about here on the show, and that's for 2 reasons. One is that it's really about doing the research and getting the facts correct. And second, I have an announcement to make right here, right now. And that announcement is that I am currently working on a book tentatively titled Socialism Sucks, exposing the myths that modern socialists tell America. I am working on that book. Hopefully it will be released in 2020. That is the goal, early 2020. I am in the middle of my final writing of the manuscript for that book. So check out the wonderful goodness that is social media for more information on that. But really what this is it's an extension of what we've done in this series so far. I really want to take on the myths that modern socialists are telling us and arm you with the facts, the figures, and the arguments to be able to make against those myths. And we've talked about a few of them, but I really want to be able to expand on it, give you the information, and educate you, but also help us win this battle, because it is a battle. Early days in this show, I talked about republicanism versus socialism, and I lay that argument out in much more detail in the book, but I'm also talking about healthcare, I'm talking about modern monetary theory, I'm talking about a whole range of lies that get told by modern American socialists. And there is no lie greater than what ex-Democratic nominee for Florida's governor and very much a socialist Andrew Gillum recently wrote in an op-ed in the Washington Post, which was titled, "Socialism is a GOP smear. Democrats have to fight back." Now, you could say that labeling all Democrats as socialists would be a smear, and you would be right. But at the same point in time, the party as a whole keeps lurching further and further left, and there's only one way to go the more left you go, and that is towards socialism. So with that in mind, I have to ask, socialism is a smear from Andrew Gillum? Like, if I were to call you a socialist to your face, Andrew Gillum, would you be PO'd? Would you be pissed? Or would you accept that as a badge of honor? because I'm pretty sure you ran on all sorts of actual socialist policies and you call yourself a Democrat who happens to be a socialist. Seriously, folks, this is what Gillum had to say in his op-ed. Now, when I talk about socialism being a GOP smear, this is what he says. Perhaps more than anywhere else in the country, the traumatizing histories of authoritarian socialist regimes are active memories for voters in Florida. For the thousands of Floridians who have come from Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua, the word socialism is rife with deep pain and anger. Republicans exploit this experience, preying on the fears of immigrants and their families. So, I'm going to unpack that statement next. I'm going to go with what he really is going to try to tell us. Quote, some in my party proudly identify as democratic socialist, in part because they've been the victims of the unfettered capitalism of the 1990s and 2000s that culminated in the 2008 financial crisis. But every single Democratic candidate, elected official, and activist I know, regardless of labels, is a champion for opportunity, democracy, and human freedom. Now, I want you to think about this. He's saying regardless of the label that we would give him, whether that's the GOP or whether that would be the broader libertarian and conservative movement, regardless of the label that we would give them, they're champions for opportunity. They're champions of democracy and human freedom. That flies in the face of every known piece of history of actual socialist countries. Real socialism. Even democratic socialist societies like Venezuela, like Ecuador, like Argentina, like Zimbabwe. But Gillum's not done because apparently, if he's so offended by the smear of the GOP, he's going to throw a smear right back. He says, it is ironic, of course, because with each passing day, Trump is proving that he is the spitting image of the Latin America authoritarians who govern through fear and coercion. The president, by word and deed, has betrayed the most basic principles of our democracy by bullying allies to manipulate elections, enriching himself and his family from his office, and attacking the free press. These tactics don't belong just to him. They are straight from the playbook of every dictator. Now, there is a sliver of truth in what Gillum is saying there about Donald Trump. But it's not about Trump. It is true that every dictator would attack the free press, that they would enrich themselves, and that he would manipulate an election. But that accusation against Donald Trump of manipulation of an election is so gross. It is so offensive. It is brutally dishonest. There is no evidence, none. We just went through 3 years of the Russian collusion story. There has not been a single shred of credible evidence, not one. The Robert Mueller report took 3 years, and they couldn't find a single shred of evidence that Donald Trump manipulated the 2016 election. So, with that out of the way, the rest is very true of socialist nations. Now, I want to know how Donald Trump is enriching himself and his family from his office. That second argument is also gross. It's also impeachable. And the Democrats right now happen to be all about impeachment. In fact, next week, we're likely to get the vote in the House of Representatives on the articles of impeachment that they will be drawing up, thanks to Nancy Pelosi. Just don't ask her about impeachment if you're in the media. So we're supposed to believe that Donald Trump is just out there enriching himself and his family from his office. There's actual laws on the books. There's actual things in the Constitution that prohibit that very act from happening. Now, you could also say that, one Barack Obama definitely enriched himself and his family by becoming president of the United States. How else did he go from a little-known state senator to a senator from the great state of Illinois, which I happen to call home, to a multi-millionaire by becoming president of the United States? In 8 years, $400,000. He's a multi-millionaire. Came out of office as a multi-millionaire. You could make the argument he was enriching himself. But if you want to make these accusations, back them up with facts. Back them up. Because you just said that you don't want to be smeared or have your party smeared. Yet you're doing the very same thing. And then about attacking the free press here. Now, I will say this. I believe that Donald Trump does really want to control the narrative that is around him, and thus, by doing so, he wants to attack the free press. If you're not covering him in a way that he likes to be able to control the narrative. And you can't do that as president. And I do think that some of the things that he does with the press are over the line. But at the same point in time, I would also point out that we live in a very polarized media world in which if you are covering the president of the United States as a quote-unquote journalistic news organization, you should be able to demonstrate some sort of, actual journalism. CNN is not doing that. MSNBC not doing that. So maybe you can make the argument that, at least in my mind, Donald Trump is fine. It should be fine not allowing them access. Because if they're not going to at least be honest about who they are, what they represent, then why should you give them access? I would be all for giving them all sorts of access if they would just come out and say, we are left-wing propaganda. Just like if Fox News would come out and say, we are center-right propaganda and we're GOP all the way. Right? I've got no problem with that. And I've said that many a time here. I think we would all be served best by people knowing and organizations being out in the open about their biases. I think it's important to the reader that they know where the biases come from. Is it left-leaning? Is it right-leaning? Is it right down the center? Now, if you tell me you're right down the center, I tell you you're full of crap as a journalist because everybody's got personal biases. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and it's very, very difficult to keep that out of the mix. But back to Gillum here, okay? Let's put all the stuff that he said about Donald Trump to the side. Let's talk about one concept. And it's why I talked about the modern socialist. Notice how I didn't use socialist. Modern American socialists, they're the kings and queens and whatever gender-neutral language term you would like to use of moving the goalposts. You point out the atrocities of Zimbabwe. You point out the atrocities of Cuba, Venezuela, the USSR. You point out Soviet Russia. You point out all the things about Nazi Germany, right? They were national socialists. That's not the socialism they're talking about. The socialism that became communism in the USSR, even though it wasn't fully achieved communism, not what they're talking about. They move the goalpost every single time you bring up failed socialist states. Every single time. Why? Because it's an inconvenient truth for them. And why I make the distinction between modern American socialist and just straight up socialist is because, at least in the 1870s, 1880s, up through the 1930s and 40s, the American socialist was proud to say, I am a socialist. And they were proud to believe actual tenets of real socialism. Today's modern American socialist literally will advocate for whatever puts them in power and gets them across the goalpost of their actual aims, which if you look at the Democratic Socialists of America website, if you look at all of the other things that are going on here, okay, if you look at all of those things, what do you end up seeing? You end up seeing real socialism. They want to control healthcare. They want to nationalize parts of the economy. They believe that collectivizing in the collectivization of work. They believe in the collectivization of the economy, whether that's through collectivizing private business or just simply taking over businesses. They believe in pure political and economic socialism. Their aim, though, is to use the current system to get that across the goal line. And once they've gone just one tiny little inch over that goal line, they're just going to steamroll right on ahead. So you have to put this in perspective, right? They don't want you to believe they're true socialists. They want you to believe that they believe in human freedom, that they believe in democracy. It's right in the term democratic socialist, right? And that they're all about opportunity. They're not about opportunity. They're about outcomes. That's what it's all about. Name me one person on that democratic stage for President of the United States that is actually talking about real opportunity for people instead of a handout. None. Maybe Andrew Yang once in a great while has an idea, but even then he's still a person that believes in the universal basic income. So when we're talking about this idea that this is just a GOP smear tactic, you have to realize that that is just pure cover, trying to give them cover, trying to get the American people to buy into this concept that they really love freedom. They do not. Andrew Gillum does not love freedom. Andrew Gillum is for all sorts of control over your life in the name of giving somebody else freedom. Freedom is not about taking from somebody and giving to somebody else. Freedom is getting the hell out of the way. It is unbelievable that Gillum would have the balls to say that socialism is just a GOP smear tactic. I mean, come on. Do you buy that with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Do you buy that with Rashida Tlaib out there? Do you buy that with any of the people that are running for president in the Democratic field? Do you buy that they're not socialist? Again, this goes back to my theme. Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. That's exactly what Andrew Gillum is trying to do here. And I think it's important because this is going to be their message going forward when they figure out that the American people will reject democratic socialism. By and large, the American people do not like the individual plans when you know the actual truth of what they're going to do. Not what the candidate will tell you, but the actual literal facts in their plan. That's true of healthcare. That's true of almost every single thing that they have talked about on the campaign trail. All right, let's move on to topic number 2, naloxone implants. Earlier this week, I actually ran into an article in the local Chicago Tribune that I found real interesting because it is this intersection of two things that really super fascinate me and I don't always understand, but they're science and technology. I mean, I kind of work at a tech company for a living, but in this case, it was the news that a Northwestern researcher has developed a potentially life-saving implant for the delivery of the drug naloxone. Yes, that's the drug that can save somebody who's overdosing on opioids. Now, according to the article, John Rogers, director of the school, which is Northwestern's Center for Biointegrated Electronics, has helped to devise a gadget the size of a flash drive that can be implanted under the skin. If a sensor detects that a person's blood oxygen level has dropped to a dangerous level, it automatically releases a stored dose of naloxone. It's a fully autonomous system, almost like an implantable emergency response system, providing a first responders type of functionality, but without human intervention, said Rogers. Now, this is an interesting idea to me because, being able to do this, how does somebody who is overdosing be able to administer this drug themselves? Somebody would have to be there to administer the drug right now, and that somebody may not make it in time to be able to save this individual. I think it's an interesting idea. And it won a $10 million grant from the National Institutes of Health, helping to end addiction long-term initiative, which aims to find scientific solutions to the opioid crisis. Now, according to the article, it says that animal testing is scheduled to begin in 2020, with clinical trials in humans could come within 5 years. Now, that last part seems absolutely insane to me. 5 years to save lives in this battle against the opioid crisis and opioid addiction? 5 years. 5. Now, here's where my brain went when I critically thought through this. If that whole idea that it's going to take 5 years just to go from animal testing to human clinical trials, if that doesn't highlight the point of why drugs in this country come to market as expensive as they do, I don't know what situation would highlight that for you. I say that we, as a society, could be doing better, more efficient work when it comes to clinical trials here. In today's world, it's absolutely insane that it's going to take 5 years to figure this stuff out. It's absolutely nuts. You should be able to create an algorithm. You should be able to create the theory in algorithmic form, plug in the data points that you get from your clinical trial, and extrapolate that out and figure out things in a much quicker manner. Now, if you want to actually lower the cost of drugs, how about lowering the time that it takes to prove safety and that the drug actually works? Why does it take 5 years to go just from animal trial to human clinical trial? This is not a new drug. This is not some never before seen thing on this earth. It's just a new way of administering this drug. Yet, it's supposed to take 5 years just for human clinical trials to begin, and I would guess another 5 years after that, so you're looking at a decade. 10, mother bleeping 10. A decade before this new potential life-saving opioid release or implant would come online. What good does that do? In 10 years, we might have a very different scenario on our hands. I mean, could you imagine putting a decade of work into bringing a product to market and then the government telling you what price you can also bring that product to market at? Because that is where we're heading as a political society, right? I don't know anybody that's not advocating for price reforms within the prescription drug market. But I would ask you this: what business person or even a charity, let's say it was a charity that decided to create this, what business person or what charity would just allow the government to dictate the price to them? Why? Is the government funding all of this? Now, yes, in this case, they gave them a $10 million grant from the National Institute of Health, but it was a very targeted grant. And on top of it, I guarantee you they have a ton of private money in the mix. But what business person or charity would just say, oh, yep, throw your hands up. Okay, we can only do this. You imagine how expensive it is to run a set of trials for an entire decade and then come out the backside and lose your ass because the government tells you what you can do with that price? How are you supposed to know and build that into the mix? How are you supposed to be able to do that would be my question. But would you look at that? Our time here on this half of the show is about over. On the other side, we're going to continue our conversation about naloxone and this idea of an implantable situation. We're going to talk about Common Core's epic fail by going by the numbers, and we'll talk even more about Chick-fil-A and Uber's sexual assault. We shall see you on the flip side here on Mojo 50 Radio. And welcome back to Critical Thinking here on Mojo 50 Radio. It is me, your host with the most numbers, Andrew Coppins, at The Coppins Show on Twitter, Facebook, you name it. On social media, that's where you can find me, Coppens, Coppens for the last name. If you are new to the program, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube page. You will be able to see the show in its entirety there after it has premiered over at the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page. That's right, each and every week you can see this show live. You can subscribe to the podcast as well, leave it a 5-star rating, help boost this show even more than it already is. But with that being said, we've got a lot to cover here in the second half of the show, so let's just get into it. And before we were so rudely interrupted, we were talking about the life-saving or the potential life-saving on-demand delivery system for naloxone or Narcan or whatever you want to call it, the drug that basically resuscitates an individual who might be going through an overdose situation with opioids. And we were talking about the fact that it's going to take them at least 10 years. And where do we go when you develop a drug for 10 years? And what would happen if the government were to be the one that's controlling pricing? But there's a flip side to all of this. It's not just economic. For me, this is about a moral situation. Because yes, it is one thing if there's somebody there that administers this drug to save the life of somebody who's going through a crisis moment. Okay. Yes, I think that is a very useful scenario for Narcan or naloxone, whatever version of it you want to talk about. Okay. But one very major concern about this new on-demand delivery system is the message that it's going to be sending to people who want to use and abuse drugs. I ask this question of myself. Is this really just a way for them to continue abusing? And shouldn't we actually be working towards them not using heroin or other opioids in general? Shouldn't that be the end goal? Does this get to that goal? Now, on the other hand, what does somebody like myself who's much more libertarian leaning and believes that drugs by and large should be legalized more broadly do about this scenario? Because all of these things that are being done or worked up, like these implants and the basic opium dens with safe nurses and doctors in the area, right? Masquerading as medical clinics, all of these things fly in the face of personal responsibility. That's the other aspect of this, okay? As a libertarian, the credo is what? Maximum freedom, maximum personal responsibility, right? So why do I or society have a responsibility to enable your habit? Nobody just takes heroin without knowing the consequences of doing so. Nobody. You don't just shoot up heroin one day for the shits and giggles of it. You want to put that needle into your arm. You deal with the consequences. You want to snort that line. You deal with the consequences. It is not on the rest of us to provide you with a free, safe space for you to abuse your body. It's not on the rest of society to pay for your naloxone implant so you can just continue to string yourself out forever and ever and ever and ever, just like it would be with alcohol, okay? You can't go buy beer, wine, or liquor with your SNAP money, the money that's paid for by you and I. It's not on us as taxpayers to fund your rehab or for us to stop you from buying the thing that's literally killing you, like alcoholics buying alcohol. Not on me to do that. Now, if you want to be a charitable organization and offer the, to pay for the naloxone implants, go for it. Nobody's stopping you from doing that. But to suggest, because this is the other thing that will come out of this, okay, is that it'll be demanded to be free for those people that are abusing, right? You go to rehab for heroin, you get a naloxone implant to avoid that rehab lapse that's almost inevitable if you talk to anybody who deals with heroin addicts. Guarantee you that's the next thing that's coming down the road. Now, if that rehab clinic wants to provide it, that's fine. They can do that. That's their choice, but they're eating the cost. You and I should not be eating the costs. And I guarantee you, if you critically think through this entire problem, where do you think the cost of something like this is going to fall? It's not going to fall on the person abusing the drug. It's going to fall on you and I, the taxpayer, because this is must-need, life-saving medication. I would argue that providing them with the means to cope with whatever else is going on in their life is much more important. Finding the people who actually want to save themselves in these scenarios, and maybe providing them with an avenue to this through rehab. But just to put this to market, I don't find this to be a good use of this drug. I really don't, because at the end of the day, the message that's being sent is that abusing yourself and thus abusing the community, abusing all the loved ones around you is okay. Go ahead, keep using, because I've got this on-demand system that's going to save me every single time I do something stupid. Maximum freedom, maximum responsibility. You want to stick that needle full of heroin into your arm, you lose the right to be saved by the rest of us. The consequence of you sticking that needle in your arm, just like the consequence of having 10 beers and getting behind the wheel of the car, is potential death. If you don't like the consequences, if you don't want the consequences, don't do the action. Now, you can also argue that obviously nobody can handle heroin, nobody can handle doing opioids because they're such a powerful drug. They take over every aspect of your brain, your body, everything around you. They take over your entire life. I understand that. But what I'm saying is that if you're somebody who wants to go down that path, you've already made your choice. You deal with the consequences. And those consequences include the potential that you kill yourself by abusing that drug. Just the same way as an alcoholic who doesn't want to get help continues to buy the thing that's killing them, decides to buy that extra bottle of wine or that extra fifth of Jack, and ends up killing their liver, which ends up killing themselves. It's a terrible thing. But the reality is, if you believe in maximum freedom, you have to believe in maximum responsibility. And the responsibility is to what in these scenarios? It's not on us to take care of you. It's on you to take care of yourself. And abusing drugs, abusing alcohol is a you, not an us scenario. All right, but let's get away from talking about drugs and alcohol, and let's talk about the addiction of money for the states. That's right, the third topic for this show. A little bit of by the numbers, not a full by the numbers segment, but Common Core. Yes, folks, two words that are a thorn in every parent's side. If you've ever had to do math with a youngster these days, my God, what in the blue hell? But anyway, now apparently it's also a thorn in everybody's pocketbooks too. And here's what it all comes down to. If you want to convince me that one size fits all educational models are best for this country, how about you bring us results for our investment as taxpayers? And what results would I be talking about? Well, I would be talking about international testing. Yes, Conservative Review brings us this little dandy about Common Core. Now, there was an exam that takes place. It's called the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, which is a terrible acronym. But anyway, it's a bunch of testing exercises in math, reading, and science, and it's taken by 15-year-old students across the globe every 3 years. So starting in 2010, when Common Core became a thing in most states here in the United States, now we've got ways to measure multiple groups here. So a report on the results, which were announced on Tuesday, stated the following. Students in the United States performed above the ODEC average in reading, 505 score points, and science, 502, and below the ODEC average in mathematics at 478. Their scores were similar to those of students in Australia, Germany, New Zealand, Sweden, and the United Kingdom in at least 2 of the 3 subjects. The trend lines of the United States mean performance in reading since 2000, mathematics since 2003, and science since 2006 are stable, with no significant improvement or decline. The report also highlighted a widening performance gap in reading between socioeconomically advantaged and disadvantaged students. Some 27% of advantaged students in the United States, but only 4% of disadvantaged students were top performers in reading, according to the report. China, in contrast to the U.S., continued to make gains, posting the highest scores in all 3 of the tested subjects. Students from China recorded an average reading score of 555, an average science score of 590, and an average math score of 591, topping U.S. students by over 100 points in that math category. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, let's bring in another number, because according to the Federalist back in 2016, at that point in time, the United States had already spent $80 billion in different states. I think the state of California was spending $10 billion on Common Core. But $80 billion of your dollars and my dollars have gone to Common Core. And the promise of Common Core was what? That there would be a standardization of the goals and the testing and the curriculum in the United States. And why did they want to do that? It was because they wanted to decrease the achievement gaps here in the United States and make us much more competitive on an international testing standards. We have spent $80 billion, probably closer to $100 billion at this point in time in the last decade. And there's no significant improvement or decline since 2006, pre-Common Core. 2003, pre the idea of Common Core. Since 2000 even, when I graduated high school. Shout out to the 20-year class reunion coming up. But think about that. We've invested $100 billion in education. For what? Nothing. Nothing. We have not improved or declined. We've literally flatlined. $100 billion more than we would have spent for nothing. So, what would be the solution here? Well, according to Daniel Koritz, who is an expert on testing and a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, the argument is that even when government initiatives and curricular changes are adopted, it's improved teaching quality that matters. Even when they've got those government initiatives and curricular changes adopted, doesn't mean that the teaching quality also follows suit. And therein lies the problem. And this has been said for literally a couple of decades now. If you want to improve how students perform here in the United States, you've got to do it by improving the standards of teachers, especially the standards of teachers that go into social economical disadvantaged areas. Okay? The people who are in poor areas, whether that's poor rural areas, whether that's the inner city, whether that's some suburb area that might be a little more poor than the next richest neighborhood, that's where you need to target the quality teachers first and foremost. If you want to decrease the achievement gap, if you want these numbers to, on average, go up, if you put the best and brightest of the teachers into those communities, you see the biggest returns. It's been proven out when people in certain states in this country that'll go nameless, when they have actually targeted quality teachers. Now, the other aspect of this is, how do you target a quality teacher? How do you know what a quality teacher is? And I think this is also part of the problem with Common Core. There are no standards that teachers are really being held to. How do you standardize stuff from the teacher's side? You can't. You imagine going up against the Chicago's Teachers Union or the New York City Teachers Union or LA, let alone rural America's teachers unions, and tell them, oh, by the way, you're now going to have to live up to a standard of quality in your product, which is your teaching. There's no way in hell that union is going to stand for that. No way in hell that's going to happen. So again, when you look at the numbers, $80 to $100 billion being spent on Common Core in the testing from international standards, which isn't like some, this test, by the way, is not some like, fill in the blank theoretical test. These are real world situations that they test them on. They use real world scenarios to understand the comprehension of the ideas that they should know by the time they're 15 years old. We have invested more money. I think it's on average somewhere in the United States, I believe it's upwards of $13,000 to $15,000 per student. Per student. For average results. We spend more money per student educating people here in the United States than anywhere else in the world. And we get average results. That should be unacceptable as a society. If I'm going to pay that kind of money to educate my child, if I had a child, but if I was a parent, I would be rightfully pissed. And I would demand and start demanding within my community that action gets taken for quality over quantity. But you have to see, it's a whole evil system here because they need the body. They don't care about the result. As long as they keep the body in school, they get the funding from the state level. That's why I'm an advocate of this idea. And this idea is radical in some circles, but it's very simple for me. You take the cost, whatever the per pupil average is, okay? You hand it back to the parent, and you allow them to choose where they send their child to school. If you want to send them to the public school down the road, you can do that. If you want to send them to the charter school that's set up 2 blocks away that's doing something more innovative, that could be your choice. If you want to homeschool your child, you get the money to homeschool your child. If you want to send them to the religious school of your choice, so be it. But that money travels with the student. It doesn't get sent to a district that, by the way, if you send your kid to a private school, you're still paying to put another kid through public school. The money, just like an HSA, I would say, make it an educational HSA. That money, pre-tax, right, goes to an account for your child, and every year that you can use that amount of money to help pay for that tuition cost. I guarantee you that public schools would go out of business super fast. And here's why. Because they don't deliver results. And those private schools that take crap tons of money and don't deliver results, they'll be gone too. Make the market competitive. That is how you really solve this scenario. All right. So let's move forward from that. And let's talk about Chick-fil-A. There's an update because last week on the show, we talked about Chick-fil-A and the outing of its donation to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is responsible for a lot of the hatred thrown at Chick-fil-A, thanks to the SPLC designating another organization, the Family Research Council, as a quote-unquote hate group, and thus giving a madman the impetus for his 2012 attack on the Family Research Council that included the goal of smearing Chick-fil-A sandwiches in their faces because apparently they're both anti-gay marriage. Okay? And then I asked one simple question. Why in the blue hell would they have done that? Why do this as a supposedly biblically based charitable organization like Chick-fil-A is? In 2017, 5 years removed from somebody literally trying to use your chicken sandwich to make a political point. So I'm going to say this real quick, okay? It is one thing if you were to donate this as maybe a Christian organization, turning the other cheek or bridging the divide, so to speak. But there was nobody at Chick-fil-A that spoke those words. If that were actually the case, it's super easy. Just come out and say, hey, look, as a Christian organization, we believe, right? We believe that bridging divides and, love thy enemy is the way to go. And that is why we donated to the SPLC. Super easy. You don't get the Christian backlash. You get people that say, okay, I could understand that. I wouldn't personally do it, but I understand. Right? But instead, they have stayed completely silent on this matter. And that has spoken volumes. So, but while all of that donation to the SPLC of a whole whopping $2,500, by the way, and its meaning were being debated, there was more to the overall story that should tell us a lot about where Chick-fil-A actually, as a business, is heading with its values going forward. First, from Town Hall, we have the statement from Rodney Bullard, who is the VP of Corporate Responsibility and Executive Director of the Chick-fil-A Foundation, who, in announcing the stopping of donations to the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I think it was the Peterson House as well, said the following: "We don't want our intent and our work to be encumbered by somebody else's politics or cultural war. If something gets in the way of our mission, that is something that we are mindful and cognizant of." Well, it turns out Town Hall did a little more digging because that's really weird, right? Like, why would you donate to the SPLC and then say you don't want politics or cultural war to be your thing? Well, it turns out other organizations that the wonderful Chick-fil-A Foundation has donated to include the Covenant House. Oh, that's right. That same house that marched in the New York Gay Pride Parade to show their inclusivity. But the Salvation Army can't be... by the way, the Covenant House is a Catholic organization, and they're Baptist. But yeah, sure, we don't want to get political. How about this? The YWCA also receives money. They happen to have a very radical pro-abortion stance, by the way, not even like a mainstream, not even close to that. Okay? They repeatedly partner with Planned Parenthood. They also fund, by the way, the DC-based New Leaders Council that identifies it as a, quote, hub of progressive millennial thought leadership. Again, you don't want to get into the culture wars. That was your reasoning for not doing the Salvation Army and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes anymore. But you found the New Leaders Council, the YWCA. Oh, and a $50,000 donation to the Pace Center for Girls, which, happens to be another pro-abortion organization. Gloria Steinem spoke at their most recent Girls Summit. How about this? Usher's new look. Oh yeah, that's right, a Disruptivator Summit, all about progressive community organizing, and they got an over $38,000 donation. How about Chris 180? $27,000 in 2017, $25,000 in 2019, which happens to be a pro-LGBT behavioral health and child welfare service agency. They boast of being awarded the leader in supporting and serving LGBT families and youth from the Human Rights Campaign. There's other organizations. I hope you get the point here. I really hope you get it. Chick-fil-A as an organization is turned completely against everything that it was supposed to have stood for. Everything that you stood in line for in 2012 to stand up for them about, they don't care about. They really don't. They have used the Christian movement to make them money and spit directly in your face. They have told you to your face that they are one of you. But in the back room, And it's fine if that's what they want to do. The problem is they're not telling you the truth. They're lying to you. They're telling you they're just switching some things up. There's still this great Christian organization. But around every corner, every single donation basically that has gone out in the past few years has increasingly gone to progressive, left-wing, radical organizations. Let that sink in when you or anybody else is talking about Chick-fil-A. As an organization, as an individual, again, the theory of don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining applies here. It is super, super offensive to me to, as an organization, use your Christianity to sell and market a business, and then on the very backside to fund everything that you're supposed to stand against. That is an unforgivable offense in my view. And that is a reason why I wouldn't want to do business with them. But as I also mentioned last week, I would prefer if these organizations got out of the business of donating to controversial charities at all. I would rather them spend their money on their business. I would rather them help give more money to their workers who could then choose the charities they would like to donate to. I think that is a much, much better scenario at play here. And with that, we end this week's edition of Critical Thinking. I will save the Uber story for next week, or maybe in overtime over on the YouTube channel. So check that out. Again, just type in my name, Andrew Coppens, Coppens, Coppens. And do not forget, by the way, tune in right after this show for the debut of the HoloNet with my brother from another mother, my millennial brother from another mother, Matthew Holloway. That's right, coming up right here on Mojo 50 Radio. Don't forget, be smart, be safe, and on Wisconsin this week.